All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rob Shane. I am the communications manager here at Restore America's Estuaries. We're really happy to have you join us this afternoon or morning for those of you on the West Coast and in the Midwest, Central time zones. We're super happy about the panel we've been able to put together today. We have a lot of experts here to talk about the Farm Bill, processes, history, current situation, and what you can expect as we move ahead. If you give me just a few minutes here, I'd like to share with you a couple things we've got going on at Ray here in the future and talk a little bit about our panelists. So I will let some people file in here, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you give me 1 second there. Awesome. So once again, this is the Farm Bill and Coastal Conservation webinar scheduled for today at 1 o'clock. And a little bit about Restore America's Estuaries. Ray is dedicated to the protection and restoration of bays and estuaries as essential resources for our nation. We consist of 10 member groups listed here on the screen that do conservation restoration work regionally across the country. We also have a strong cohort of affiliate member groups listed there at the bottom. If you are interested in joining our affiliate member program, feel free to reach out to me at the end of this webinar or anytime in the future, and I can give you more details on that and what benefits come from joining as an affiliate member. Another thing, keep an eye out for. I know we are still almost exactly 12 months away from it, but this time next year, we'll be hosting our biennial summit. We'll be down in New Orleans, December 4th through 8th. Information on that will really start to come out in the new year, but just wanted to give you a heads up. So keep your calendars open again, December 4th through 8th as we move ahead. If you are interested in joining Ray for any future events, we do most of our promotion through our social media channels. Please do follow us, interact with us, engage with us online. That way you don't miss anything, miss future events, future webinars, future publications, or anything important like that. I do want to let you know that this morning's webinar is brought to you by the Habitat Network Coalition. HabNet is a group of conservation restoration organizations across the country who come together to create resilient coastal communities, provide forums to share expertise and resources, support collaborative habitat conservation along the coast and coastal watersheds, and most importantly, further the mission of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's coastal program. This is a free coalition to join. If you are interested, you can visit the website estuaries.org/getinvolved/habnet. I'll be sure to post that in the link in the chat too. If you do have questions throughout today's event, feel free to post them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we'll get to them. We do intend for this to be a roughly hour-long conversation, roundtable format, open Q&A. So do go ahead and enter your questions in. We'll try and get to all of them, or as many as we can. And if we can't get to them, I'm sure our panelists wouldn't mind following up with you directly after the event. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Paul Babbitt. Paul is staff director of the House Agriculture Committee's Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee. Before joining the committee, he served as deputy chief of staff in Representative Tom O'Halloran's office, Congressman from Arizona. Paul was gracious enough to join us as a late addition. Some of you may notice we're supposed to have Adam Tarr join us from the Senate Ag Committee. Unfortunately, he had some family stuff come up, wasn't able to join us. And Paul graciously stepped in his place and is here to help us out today. So we appreciate Paul. Next, we have Dave Walker. Dave is the Farm Conservation Programs Coordinator at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's headquarters office here in Washington, D.C. He's been there for about 16 years. He works with USDA agencies responsible for implementing conservation programs of the Farm Bill to maximize the fish and wildlife benefits of those programs. So super knowledgeable guy. I'm sure he's going to be able to answer any of your questions about how to use this money in the future. Next, Ken Creasy is the National Program Manager at the Natural Resource Conservation Services Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and Wetlands Reserve Easements, also known as ACEP WRE. Ken has a PhD in ecology from UC Davis and has spent most of his 25-plus-year career focused on conservation of wetland habitat and bird populations. And last but not least, we have Jeremy Peters. Jeremy is joining us actually from Puerto Rico today while he's on the road traveling. It's a bright and blustery 30 degrees here in Washington, D.C., where I think the rest of us are located. So Jeremy's got some sun and warm weather down there. Jeremy's the CEO of the National Association of Conservation Districts. During his time with NACD, he has served as the Chief Operating Officer as well as the Legislative Affairs Manager. Before joining NACD, he served as the Federal Policy Director for the American Farmland Trust and directed climate and conservation and energy programs for the National Farmers Union. So we are super thankful to have our group here with us. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start the first bit of questions here. If you don't mind, give me 1 second to pull them up. So my first question is for Paul. So as a staff member there in the House Ag Committee, I guess if you could just give us a little bit of background on the Farm Bill, where we are currently, what do you envision the process looking like over the next couple of years? Maybe more specifically, how folks, our audience today, can kind of engage in the process as it moves ahead towards the next reauthorization cycle.
Yeah, so, right here, we're looking at kicking things off right at the beginning of 2022. The chairman and his subcommittee chairs have been regularly gathering input from stakeholders. And, I expect that to pick up, and a conversation about oversight of 2018 Farm Bill programs to really gear up now that we've got more undersecretaries getting confirmed over at USDA and able to come up to the Hill and speak to those. Again, I really expect the pace of those subcommittee, full committee hearings to pick up in the new year. Again, both in that oversight capacity and in the look forward to the next Farm Bill capacity. The Farm Bill has a great legacy of being bipartisan. I expect that to continue moving forward. I expect, both groups of leadership to work together to make sure we're ready to get this done on the timeline we need to. As for what folks ought to be doing, if you're listening to this, you're doing the right thing. I would encourage you guys to, keep chatting with Rob, Jeremy, anyone else that, you have an interest in making sure their voice is heard. Similarly, I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone. Feel free to shoot me an email and I'll happily have a chat with you, about any priorities you may have. So thanks, Rob.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think there will be, and you've been around for a little bit longer than I have on this, do you expect public comment opportunities or listening sessions, things like that in the future?
Yeah, so, not exactly sure when, but I would expect there to be a robust listening session process. Given everything that's going on with the world these days, not exactly sure when and what that'll look like, but I'm confident that there will be listening sessions, field hearings, and exactly that opportunity for public input.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. Next, I'm going to kick it over to Dave. As mentioned, Dave works for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So Dave, I guess specifically, what interest does the service, and maybe more specifically the coastal program and the Partners for Fish and Wildlife programs, have in the Farm Bill? I mean, why is this something that you all are interested in, you work with? How has it benefited those programs and other programs at the service?
Great. Well, thanks, Rob, and thanks to Ray for the opportunity to talk about the Farm Bill today, one of my favorite subjects. So if I start going long, just let me know. But yeah, our interest has been longstanding, and that's because we know the health of the country's fish and wildlife populations depends on private landowners because they manage more than 2/3 of the country's land base. And we also know that the largest source of financial and technical assistance for these landowners to voluntarily implement conservation on private and tribal lands is the Farm Bill. So when the coastal program, our coastal program and Partners for Fish and Wildlife program were established back in the mid 1980s, and that was about the same time as when the first conservation provisions were included in the Farm Bill, the 1985 Farm Bill. It was clearly understood that conservation on public lands alone couldn't sustain healthy fish and wildlife populations, and that working beyond the boundaries of our service lands in partnership with the nation's farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners was essential to be able to address fish and wildlife needs while also helping to sustain those working lands and keep them working lands. And we understand the tremendous opportunities for landscape scale conservation within the resources available through the Farm Bill. And it's been pretty consistent that there's over $5 billion annually of funding for conservation of soil, water, and wildlife habitat coming through the conservation provisions of the Farm Bill. So the ability to target even a small portion of those resources to address fish and wildlife priorities really dwarfs any of the direct funding that's available for fish and wildlife conservation to things like, excuse me, grants to the states, whether it's Pittman, Robertson, Dingell Johnson, Section 6, state and tribal wildlife grants, the North American Waterfowl Conservation Act grants, or even just the funding through our partners and coastal programs. So it's a huge resource, and that's why the service is engaged at all levels. At the national level, that's my position, and another position that we have in ecological services, working on the Farm Bill. At the regional level with our partners and coastal program regional coordinators. At the state level, where our Partners for Fish and Wildlife state coordinators are the services representatives at the NRCS Natural Resources Conservation Service state technical committees, and at the local level where our field biologists are, so that we're at the table at all those different levels where decisions are being made on program priorities, and we can have input on those decisions in order to try to maximize fish and wildlife benefits from the conservation provisions of the Farm Bill. And both our partners in coastal program complement the Farm Bill programs. We, of course, can provide fish and wildlife technical assistance and also some financial assistance in cases where landowners may not meet eligibility requirements for Farm Bill programs or want to go over and above what's required for some of these conservation programs. So it's a really good fit where we can help leverage resources and get good conservation on the ground. And we try to keep our field staff up to speed on the latest information regarding Farm Bill implementation, because it's such a enormously useful tool in their toolbox, where we've got folks out talking to landowners, sitting around the kitchen table, trying to understand what the landowner wants to do, what their needs are, and how that works with, matches up with what we want to do for the fish and wildlife resource, and being able to go into that toolbox, and whether it's a Farm Bill conservation program resource, or whether it's a partners program or coastal program, or a lot of the state fish and wildlife agencies have programs to help private landowners put conservation on the ground, a lot of NGO programs. So it's just a matter of finding the right fit, the right tool to meet the landowners' needs and put conservation on the ground. So we're
Great.
very interested.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that definitely clears that up. Ken, I'm gonna kick it over to you now. Just from NRCS perspective, I guess, can you talk a little bit about how maybe the process goes? You know, a lot of our audience today are on the ground implementers or people who hope to maybe be on the ground implementers of some of this money in the future. You know, what criteria, I guess, makes a good project? What are some of the things you all are looking for when you're selecting, you know, groups or projects to fund? And, you know, do you have any advice, I guess, more broadly for anybody who may be interested in tapping into some of this money in the future?
Great, I'm happy to talk about it. So I'm going to just take one step back first, just briefly talk. So I work with the Wetland Reserve Easement Program within NRCS. We're one half of the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, the other half being the Ag Land Easements Program. Currently where we sit under the 2018 Farm Bill, our program is authorized at $450 million per year. And when we get our technical funding out of there and other commitments this year, we looked at in our initial allocation out to our states about $170 million out the door for easements this year and easement work this year. So that's where we stand. Our program is basically one of the two large federal programs for wetland conservation, the other being, of course, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act managed through the Fish and Wildlife Service. And I used to wear that hat there. So it's sort of been double dipping here a little bit, but now with NRCS. So in terms of sort of where we're going, what makes a good program. So, you know, we are a federal easement program. The easements we purchase are US held, and we are restricted to working with private landowners. So private landowners can be both individuals, they can be nonprofit organizations, they can be trusts. What we can't do is purchase lands owned by a state or a federal authority or other sort of, I guess, governing body, so to speak. So there are some restrictions in terms of what we can do. We're a voluntary program as well. And what we do, again, with the easement is we go in and purchase the development rights on the property. So what we're looking for essentially is, for our program, it has to be land, there has to be wetlands that are former wetlands, converted wetlands, or degraded wetlands due to agricultural activities or impact. So if you have a pristine wetland out there that you just want to protect, unfortunately, it won't meet the criteria of our program. So there has to be some recent or long past agricultural impact that resulted in degradation of that habitat. In terms of what we're looking for, again, is, so our program is managed through the states. So we do these allocations out to the states. Each of our states manage their programs separately. So we help coordinate at the national level. What they do is there's some criteria we have to have. For example, you know, we can't have more than 1-to-1 ratio of adjacent lands to restorable wetland habitat. So those adjacent lands would be important for some connectivity to the wetland or the future wetland, but that's a ratio we do. So we have a certain restrictions in terms of there. States are also looking at the value of a particular property in its restored state to wildlife, particularly migratory birds and threatened endangered species. There are factors like connectivity to other protected lands, sort of the size of the enrollment. And so there's lots of factors the states look at weighing in terms of how they rank those applications. But they all tie back to this, again, this importance of restoring the original conditions or near original conditions for the benefit of wildlife like migratory birds and threatened endangered species. So that's really a big factor. What we do with our program, again, is that with NRCS, we have a couple different easement options, but with depending which one you're going for example, our perpetual easements, we will pay up to 100% of the easement value, and we will pay for the full restoration cost. And then it's an ongoing collaboration with the landowners to steward those lands in perpetuity, I guess, for those being a perpetual easements. We do have a 30-year option that comes with more restrictions and more commitment from the landowner. In some states, like North Dakota, we can't do perpetual. So there's some where the local state laws restrict what we can do. And then we can also work with tribes, and it's a 30-year contract in terms of working on tribal lands. So those are sort of the layout of the program. How to get involved is a good conversation. And for this group, there's potentially, I see 3 sort of different ways to get involved. If you are a landowner, then there's potential that you could get involved, and you may have property that's eligible for the program and you want to help bring into conservation. I would say the first step in that sense is reaching out to your state office and talking to the easement folks and the wetland program manager in that state office and starting to sort of discuss, hey, here we're interested in talking about your program. We've got some property that may be eligible. We'd like to sort of get your sense, come and take a look at it and have conversations. So that would start with our state office. So that's a good place to go if you are a landowner. If you're not a landowner, another way to potentially get involved is what we call our Wetland Reserve Enhancement Partnership Program. It's REP, so WRE with a P on the end. What our REP program is every year we do a funding announcement where we set aside a certain number of funds for the WRE program that are set aside for partnerships with entities like nonprofits, state agencies, and others who want to help support NRCS in the implementation of the WRE program. So the ways that partners can engage, they can help us with our due diligence activities that we need to do to prepare for the closing of an easement. They can help with restoration planning. They can help with the implementation of restoration activities. There's various ways that you can bring capacity to NRCS to really help us deliver this program. So it's a REP partnership program. We do announcements every year. This last year, we had an announcement back in the summer. We were able to fund 5 new projects this year under that program. For this year, I guess the first year, those 5 new partnerships, we're going to be putting about $9 million on the ground across multiple states. And again, so that's a way for you to get involved as a partnership with NRCS, helping sort of collaborate and implement the program. The last way I'd say is there's always a great sense of being able to do outreach and help connect us as an agency with landowners. In some cases, some of our states, there's high interest in the program, and we may be able to only fund 10% of applications in any particular year. So there's a backlog of interest in the program, but there's others that we may be able to help connect potential landowners that you're aware of in these coastal systems with the agency that we may not be aware of. So a good sort of I guess ending point is last year we helped support the state of California with conversations with a landowner there in San Francisco Bay, and in the north part of the bay we were able to help them connect those landowners with the program and got them enrolled. We're working on closing on an easement. I don't remember the size of the easement, but it's about a $6 million project that we're going to be working on in North San Pablo Bay, part of the north part of the San Francisco Bay. So there's a case there where partners help to bring landowners together with NRCS and help identify a program that works for them and their land and where their interests are. And we're working on closing on easement on that property. So it's going to be a big win for the north part of San Francisco Bay. So
Great.
I'll leave it at that, and we can continue to answer more questions as we go along.
Well, yeah, congratulations on putting a bow on that. I think that's a fantastic success story. Certainly one worth sharing. We did have a question come in. Maybe you'd be able to answer fairly quickly here. Do you know how many acres were part of this past year's REP funding, generally speaking?
So right now, our REP projects are usually about 3 to 5 years in length. They vary, but that's how long we do. And we provide, they come in with a total project budget, and then we've split those funds out by year because the way our program works is we obligate funds when we enroll a property. That may not be when we actually close the easement, when we do those obligations, when we actually enroll the properties. The plan this year, I think, if I had to put an acreage on it, I can't remember off the top of my head because we had some small projects and some larger projects this year. We had a big focus on trying to bring historically underserved landowners into the program. So we are recognizing we're getting some smaller parcels in a few of our projects, but I would say this year for about $9 million, I think we were looking at trying to fund somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 acres enrolled in the program. So something like that would be a guess. We have some ongoing REP projects that were larger in size. We had one that's about $28 million in the lower Mississippi Louisville Valley across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And so I think that one over the term of that larger project, they want to enroll about 9,000 acres across the 5 years. So it varies in size. We could have an individual project. We could have sort of a numerous large projects, but we're really looking for ways to collaborate, identify sort of a unique need, maybe tied to what our ask is for that year. This year, again, an emphasis on historically underserved landowners. And so, I think there's the small to larges, I guess we'll take it that way. We can work across the board on all those.
Okay, great, thanks. And last but certainly not least, Jeremy, and I guess, first, maybe if you don't mind, give us a little bit of a rundown of NACD and what it is that you all do and why you are interested in Farm Bill programs. And then, if you have any specific examples, how groups, how your member groups or your organizations have used this money to put projects on the ground, especially as it relates to coastal resilience and coastal conservation, and, what from the proposer side, from the grantee side, what kind of went into the process of deciding what projects you wanted to apply for versus, maybe ones that you didn't. And, how was it putting the proposal together, making an application? And, again, any advice you might have for anyone else out there, I guess now, you might be a direct competitor with them when it comes to this money, but, anything you could tell anybody who's interested in trying to get in this program for the first time or haven't done so in a few years.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rob, and hello, everyone. Really appreciate Ray convening the webinar today, and thanks to both to Ray and the sponsors of the webinar. Really pleased to participate on behalf of NACD, and first want to give a shout out to a few of our staff that have helped really advance our coastal conservation work over the last several years. Candace Abenanti, who's on the webinar, our Southeast Region representative based in North Carolina, and Ariel Rivers, our Pacific Region representative, who's based in California. They both support one of our internal working groups. We have a coastal resource policy group that's really focused on the needs of coastal communities and how that programs such as Farm Bill program funding can be effectively utilized to address those resource concerns. At NACD, all of our work is on behalf of our 3,000 local soil and water conservation districts all across the country. There's a conservation district that covers virtually every county of the country. And the purpose for the conservation districts is to provide local leadership, local input, and priority setting for the resource concerns that are of greatest need within the community. So certainly as we think about coastal conservation and how we're defining coastal conservation, there's a broad set of issues that fall into that category. And we have conservation districts all along the coast, throughout the Great Lakes and other parts of the country that are really attuned to those needs and working to proactively address them. We kind of define coastal conservation as a wide range of activities that impact coastal resources or coastal communities. Some of the activities could be upstream conservation practices that impact the downstream coastal environment. They also could be conservation practices that are directly implemented along a coastline. They also may be activities that impact the resiliency of coastal communities. So there's really a broad section of different impacts, different practices and programs that could be utilized to address any of those areas. As I mentioned, we have conservation districts located, all along the coast in proximity to coastal areas and upstream from the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the Great Lakes, the Gulf of Mexico, and all of those experience common challenges in terms of resource management. I mentioned our coastal resource policy group, and really they're representatives, they're thought leaders from within our organization, from within our partners that are helping us to recognize the link between land use and coastal resource protection, identifying the conservation programs and resources that are available for conservation districts and partners to utilize, to be able to educate and promote program funding that benefits the coast and inhabitants, and to engage new partners that support and expand the role of conservation districts in coastal resource management opportunities. We're always on the lookout, especially at the local conservation district level, for new partners. I would characterize it not as, we don't view that as direct competition, but we're looking for collaborators. We're looking for people that are also concerned about the issues that our members are concerned about, and looking to, address those in a proactive and comprehensive manner. So always on the lookout for new partners that are looking to improve the natural resources within their communities. Since many of the coastal areas are also major areas of population, we can't discount the impact of cultural, social, and economic impacts. And that's also an area where NACD's coastal efforts also interact with our urban conservation efforts. And those considerations are tremendously important when we think about meeting the needs of local communities and understanding what are the economic, what are the social, what are the cultural drivers that are either going to facilitate that work or that could be barriers to achieving the work, and identifying those so that they can be proactively addressed. Speaking a little bit about conservation districts and coastal conservation, if we think about our broad definition of the upstream, the coastal, and then also the resiliency impacts, many conservation districts that don't even have coastlines within their jurisdiction are still supporting coastal conservation work through the efforts that they're doing to improve upstream water quality, to improve non-point source pollution controls, to do watershed education and outreach, or to help plan and implement best management practices on private lands. All of those practice implementations benefit and they accrue to downstream water users, ultimately to coastal communities. Many coastal conservation districts also engage directly in activities like habitat restoration and invasive species removal, improving living shorelines, and all sorts of different types of activities that have a benefit for coastal conservation. A lot of conservation district funding support and with our partners comes through the Farm Bill and through the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So we work very closely at the national level with NRCS. We work even closer at the state and at the local level with one of our closest federal partners to ensure that program implementation is effective and that it's meeting the local resource concerns. A few examples I wanted to talk about in terms of some coastal resource conservation. One is in New Jersey, an oyster reef restoration project that the Ocean County Soil Conservation District has conducted in partnership with Parsons Seafood in Tuckertown, New Jersey. This program utilizes Environmental Quality Incentives Program funding, or EQIP funding, as part of the suite of programs that are helping to address oyster restoration. The Ocean County Soil Conservation District collaborated on this project with the Parsons Seafood Company and looking at aquaculture and how they can utilize the program funding under EQIP to recycle oyster shells, to rebuild depleted oyster beds, and to restore not only the economic activity within the watershed, but also to improve water quality, to improve the ecosystem function within that specific watershed. So the Ocean County SCD, along with Parsons Seafood and several local partners, have been successfully seeing improvements within the watershed, the Barganat Bay watershed, to further develop the conservation practices and to improve the coastal community there. Another is with the Cape Cod Conservation District under the Cape Cod Water Resources Restoration Project in Massachusetts. This effort utilizes the NRCS Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention programs, the PL 566 watershed program, to address some significant water resource challenges within their specific watershed. Specifically, this project has been utilized to help improve water quality, which has been a major concern, but also at the same time address salt marsh restoration, improve shellfish beds, and also improve herring runs, to install fish ladders to restore fish runs, allow the fish to be able to bypass man-made barriers, which is a pretty common theme throughout coastal areas, especially estuaries that have barriers in place to be able to continue to have the benefits of fish to be able to make it to their spawning grounds. This specific project has utilized partnership support with NRCS, the Barnstable County Commissioners, and others, with an estimated $30 million that will restore about 1,500 acres of degraded salt marsh, improving access for about 4,200 acres of spawning habitat, and improve water quality for 7,300 acres of shellfish beds over 10 years. So some short-term economic benefits that are expected, but also longer-term resiliency for that coastal community. And then a third example would be with the Guanacario Loco Watershed Initiative here in Puerto Rico. which is under the sponsorship of the Southwest Soil and Water Conservation District in partnership with NRCS and the U.S. Forest Service. And the Southwest Soil and Water Conservation District is working collaboratively with their federal agency partners and others, promoting sustainable agroforestry practices in the mountains of the upper watershed of the Wanaka Bay, which, again, the upland conservation practice adoption is having significant benefits downstream with improvement of water quality, restoring forest cover, increasing biodiversity, and reducing soil erosion. So in the lower part of that watershed, the district is also working with farmers and using Farm Bill funding like EQIP to install best management practices for water quality, for sediment control, grassed waterways, and stream bank protection to be able to slow the flow of water over land, trap sediments, and improve the downstream water quality, helping to protect coral reef habitat and fish populations just outside in the Wanaka Bay. Got several good examples of these, which I'd be happy to provide, Rob, and follow up to you. And those can be made available to the webinar participants. But to summarize, I would say, really the Farm Bill is, in a recent reauthorization of the Farm Bill, it was characterized as a Swiss Army knife. And it truly is, and the conservation title of the Farm Bill is no different. When we look at the program authorizations, the program funding that's provided, when we look at the resource concerns that are identified all across the country, working in partnership with conservation districts and their local partners, the Farm Bill provides a really effective vehicle for addressing those resource concerns, for making sure that the technical assistance, the good conservation planning, and can't talk about Farm Bill without talking about conservation planning, because the technical assistance and the conservation planning really are paramount to ensuring effective financial assistance program delivery. So working with private landowners, developing a good plan that then really creates the prescription for how they're going to go about addressing those underlying resource concerns. And that whole system just works for effective conservation delivery, working to meet the identified local resource concerns, and working in partnership across the federal, state, and local government delivery system. So again, really glad to be on this afternoon with our partners. And Rob, I'll turn things back over to you.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. That was a lot of great examples there, and I think one of the things, themes maybe I keep hearing, and one of the things we stress a lot and hear a lot is partnerships, and finding partners and working with partners on the ground at the local level, but also up the ladder to state and federal levels as well. And I may be mistaken, but there is very likely a soil water conservation district in your county if you're out there listening. If you haven't engaged with them or worked with them yet, I do encourage you to reach out to them, especially as it relates to the Farm Bill and conservation programs, but in any other context as well. We did have a question come in, and I do invite anybody out there, if you have questions, please do go ahead and type them in the Q&A or in the chat. But one of the questions we had, and I think maybe Ken and Dave, this is more for you. How do you evaluate the efficiency of investment in each easement in terms of conservation results when picking projects to fund through these programs? And I'll just say that this question came from a listener in Mexico, so we are officially an international audience today. So it's a big deal. So I'll leave it there, Ken or Dave or anyone else if you'd like to step in and answer.
So I can think of efficiency from a couple of standpoints, and I'll just sort of try to touch points. So from a timing standpoint, after we enroll a project, it takes roughly up to 2 years to close the easement. We ask that restoration work be completed within 3 years of that. So we want to have, say, from enrollment to actually fully restored, no more than 5 years. So that's our one standpoint. So larger projects that need longer to restore, that's a consideration. The other is cost. We have a restriction that, for the acres that are enrolled, there's a full value and then there's the easement value. But the restriction is that restoration can't exceed the full value of the property. So it might actually exceed the easement value, but it can't exceed the full value. So, if we're going to roll a $1 million project or $1 million project, I should say, we can't spend more than $1 million to restore that project. So that's a I believe a legal restriction in the act itself. I can't remember if that's a policy or an act restriction. So that's a little minor distinction, but that helps us keep those that recognition that there has to be sort of they can't be cost prohibitive, I guess, to enroll. So that's from an efficiency standpoint. We want to make sure that those costs are efficient. The last factor, I guess, is that some states will weigh in on that cost to restore per acre, for example, and that a project that has a less restoration cost might rank higher. We can have lots of conversation about whether a project that's cost prohibitive might be better for us because we can provide funds that a landowner can't bring to the table themselves. But definitely that's another way that we weigh in, is sort of the cost for restoration may be part of the ranking of a project for selection. So those are three things I think we think about efficiency potentially with our program.
Dave, if you have something else to add, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, I was just going to mention a coordination meeting that I was a part of yesterday. We had a coordination meeting for our Northeast region leadership with NRCS leadership in the Northeast. And there was discussions of how important the wetland reserve easements have been for salt marsh sparrow recovery, and looking at the opportunities for restoration and continued management of those particular easements, as well as looking at how enrollment of new easements to connect some of those existing easements might be a priority for moving forward. And it just reminded me of an example for coastal conservation of how effective some of these WRE easements have been, and moving forward, how we can make good use of those programs and trying to recover some of these species.
Great, thanks.
Rob, I think you're on mute.
Maybe on mute.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. We had another question come in. I was off mute and I clicked myself back on. So I'm gonna just read it here because it's a little bit long. And do you have any advice on how to bring NRCS technical services related to shellfish reef restoration to a state such as New York, where these services do not currently exist? And there's an example that this audience member gives. There are no technicians in state NRCS office qualified to do this work, and the restoration practices do not currently exist there. That may be for Ken as well.
Sorry, looking for my mute button here. So I don't necessarily have a good answer to that, because again, a lot of our implementation occurs at the state level, and the definition of practices. We have the broad definition, but sometimes what fits under that may vary, obviously, from say the Northeast coast versus the Southwest desert. My big thought process is if there is not current capacity within a state and it's happening in neighbor states, then one of the things that I would really encourage is for a conversation or collaboration with those other states. Again, at the national level, we encourage that all the time, and we see great partnerships with states working together along a common theme. So there may be capacity within one state that could be utilized to help bring that support to New York, or there's opportunities of things like we have detail work where you may be a potential to say, hey, I've got somebody working in Rhode Island doing work that's potential and has potential use in New York. Could we get some of their time to work on this capacity in New York? So that would really be a state by state conversation. But that's sort of my thought process is to start that with, if a state has capacity, see if there's a way to get collaboration, conversation going on between those two states.
Yeah, and I would jump in on that as well. There are a couple of, I think, key points within each state and territory for folks to be aware of. The conservation districts, along with NRCS and other partners, convene what's called the local working group. And that local work group really helps to identify and prioritize what are the top resource concerns. Recognize that there's always funding limitations. That's one of the things that we always have to work through as a process with the funding that's available. How do we maximize the impact for the top resource concerns within that community? So I would say, if oyster restoration is a top concern within Suffolk County, then make sure that the local work group is convened and that information is brought forward. Another key venue would be the State Technical Committee, and also ensuring that the State Technical Committee in New York has the information that they need in order to be able to respond to that local resource concern. And absolutely would agree with Ken. There's great examples throughout the Northeast region and others. Provided one this afternoon with the Cape Cod Soil Conservation District in Massachusetts, and also in New Jersey. Both of those have some restorative practices that they're working on for shellfish, and the New Jersey example specifically looking at oyster restoration. So make use of those examples and learn from those projects.
Great, thanks. That's great advice. Next, I'm gonna send this one over to Paul, because we haven't heard from him in a little bit. I want to give him a chance to talk here. As as obviously climate change becomes a bigger and bigger threat to coastal resources conservation work that is currently planned to be done, but also has maybe been completed in the past and now doesn't necessarily stand up to the new 21st century threats that we're facing. As you all are writing this legislation moving forward, how much emphasis are you placing, or do you expect to be placed on climate adaptation and mitigation as we move ahead into the next reauthorization?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think climate is going to be a bigger part of the conversation. As we've seen through recent legislation, climate is a part of the conversation in a way that it's never been before. The other thing I'll say is, within the administration, us on the Hill are seeing the administration take a bigger emphasis on climate.
Mm-hmm.
Emphasizing climate smart agriculture, that sort of thing. So I would expect that as we move into this process, we're going to hear more about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to include it in legislative efforts in ways that we haven't seen before.
Okay, great. Thanks. It's reassuring to say the least. Ken or Dave, or from your agency perspective, maybe Dave, I'll ask you first. Is there, do you envision a move more towards, maybe not more towards, but making climate and climate smart solutions a larger part of your process from Fish and Wildlife Service side as well in relation to the Farm Bill?
Absolutely. There's efforts underway across the board to figure out, what we're doing now and how we're moving forward is going to provide benefits to address climate change, looking at nature-based solutions in what we do to help in that effort. And just looking at all of our programs and how we're implementing those programs so we can focus on things that are going to make a difference, looking at the climate change situation. And I know, Ken can speak to it, the climate smart ag and forestry efforts, identifying practices that are focused on those things from the USDA standpoint.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So, a couple things I can say again is the department just did a sort of large climate assessment, and each of the agencies are now undergoing sort of a agency-wide effort to look at sort of what are the potential impacts and vulnerabilities that we face with respect to the impacts of climate change. And so that's part of an ongoing effort right now. From an easement standpoint, we like to think about we're the only perpetual program. But thinking ahead to these perpetual investments, where are we thinking in terms of giving us the flexibility to address and deal with climate change moving forward? So everything from coastal easements that we continue to purchase in areas that are modeled to be under sea with sea level rise, to the importance of marsh migration from those similar systems, ensuring we have habitat available to allow for marsh migration. to what do we do when we purchase a wetland easement in perpetuity and in 50 years, there's no water there any longer. So do we have the flexibility to manage that easement in perpetuity in light of the potential changes that are coming? So I think easements are a big player in where we're going and looking ahead at our vulnerabilities and what we're doing with our future investments. Because of all of our programs, the perpetual easements are the ones that are going to be here in the next 50 to 100 years and having to address and deal with them. So it's definitely a big factor. And as Dave mentioned, climate smart agriculture is one of the three priorities at the department right now that we're really working on addressing and trying to react to and provide feedback on. So.
Great, thanks. And we had one other question come in. This is from Meg Chadsey with the Washington Sea Grant. And I think she actually brings up a good point here because, I think, at least I thought, maybe even before we started this today, you think of the Farm Bill, you think of farm, you think of cornfields, you think of bean fields. You don't necessarily think of aquaculture, but we've talked a lot about aquaculture. And of course, that obviously is a farm practice and seems to be incorporated quite largely in the Farm Bill and the process here. And she's asking, Washington Sea Grant is currently in conversation with federal partners about restorative seaweed aquaculture to benefit upland agriculture. Essentially cultivate kelp to capture excess carbon nutrients in the marine environment and use that biomass to increase fertility. Do you see opportunities within your agencies and organizations to potentially advance this work? And if you do, she would like you to reach out. So she wrote her contact info there, but if anybody has any context or content to add to that, please feel free.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just encourage, for Meg to get in touch with the other counterparts within Washington State. There are two agencies and the conservation districts represented on the webinar today. Make contact with the Fish and Wildlife folks in Washington State. Make contact with the NRCS folks in Washington. Definitely reach out to the conservation districts. And start a discussion. If this is a practice that has upland benefit for downstream water quality, then start the discussion with partners and look for opportunities to maybe pilot the practice. Get some seed funding available to do a pilot or a demonstration to show what the benefits are, and especially the available research to be able to show what the benefits are from the research standpoint and being able to translate that into practice. But sounds like an interesting concept, and I think you probably have some partners within the state that would be eager to learn about it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Did anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Well, I don't know whether something like a conservation innovation grant opportunity may exist there, but there certainly are opportunities, as Jeremy mentioned, to look at potential new practices, new ways of doing things that could be evaluated and become part of how we do things.
Yeah, Dave, I'll just add, I don't know again where it's going, but there is some potential directed prioritization towards practices that are, shown to have good results in terms of carbon sequestration, for example. So I know that we've been talking with Forest Service recently and a little bit about the potential for peat habitat and that type of habitat having sort of good carbon sequestration and sort of organic soils under sort of natural wetlands. And that might be a tool towards prioritizing funding towards a program like WRE, where we're looking to not just protect, but restore those habitats. So there may be sort of some potential there as well in terms of that's a practice that is shown to sort of have good carbon sequestration or a good benefit for climate practices, that it might be something that's prioritized within the agency. So.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that. I think that I hope that answers, maybe kind of answers your question, get you thinking in the right direction. And we appreciate the question. I wish you luck with that project. as we're kind of coming up here on the end, I'd like give you guys one last chance if there's anything else you'd like to say that you thought of or you're thinking about, Paul, or just say goodbye if you want to. Paul, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, as we head into 2022, Farm Bill process is really going to start heating up, and don't be shy about sharing your ideas with those folks.
Great, thanks. Jeremy?
Yeah, I'd reiterate what Paul shared. We're certainly going to be convening a Farm Bill Task Force early next year for that very purpose, and that will be a chance to hear from the 3,000 local communities that we represent. So no small task, and we look forward to being able to share the fruits of that effort. And for folks on the webinar, also, if you aren't in communication with, if you don't know your local conservation district, take an opportunity to send them an email or call them up and share ideas, express your interest in working with them. The districts are always looking for partners and looking for new partners. So please reach out today.
Great, thanks. Ken?
No, I'm just going to reiterate other panelists in terms of reaching out, communicating. One of the things that Dave mentioned earlier that triggered it for me, that came out of the 18 Farm Bill for the wetland program, was a requirement that all of our states develop what we call wetland restoration criteria and guidelines, and really helping the state think about the wetlands in their state. What are the factors that prioritize those different habitats, and helping them prioritize and make decisions in terms of their ranking and selection of projects for funding. And so there's ways to sort of help through the state technical committee to help provide that guidance to the state in terms of that level of prioritization. So in coastal systems, for example, that connection with the salt marsh sparrow, that's a great species that we may be able to sort of utilize something like a document like that. The state's prioritizing its work in coastal systems for these particular and threatened endangered species and connecting habitats. So that's something that's a great tool that our states are really sort of developing and evolving, and it came out of the 18 Farm Bill. So ideas and thoughts you have for future Farm Bills, bring them to the table. It's going to help us do our job and roll out our programs.
Awesome, thanks, Ken. And Dave, any last words for us?
Just been a real pleasure being able to participate. And if folks have questions, whether it's about our role in the Farm Bill implementation process, I'm sure your folks have the contact information for our coastal program, as well as our Partners for Fish and Wildlife program that you can get off of our webpage. And don't hesitate to ask any questions, or if you're interested in the priorities that are being brought to the table as it relates to coastal conservation. We'd be glad to hear more about what folks' thoughts are and where we may want to focus our efforts, and incorporate that into both the local working groups, state technical committees, where we have those discussions.
Great, thanks, Dave. Well, I want to take a chance, thank all of you for joining us. We had roughly about 100 people here today. So clearly there's some pretty serious interest in this topic. And as we look ahead, maybe we'll reconvene some version of this event next year around this time. In the meantime, I will, if it's agreed upon from the panel here, in a follow-up email, I'll be sure to share out contact information, some relevant talking points that came from today. So all you people out there on the other end can be in touch with us. Again, I do want to invite you to consider joining the Habitat Network Coalition. Again, if you go to our website, estuaries.org/get-involved/habnet, there's more information, or you can send me an email directly. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. We're always looking for new members, new groups, new ideas, new perspectives, and new stories to share. I'd like to thank Fish and Wildlife Service, the NRCS, NACD, and the House Ag Committee and Senate Ag Committee for sharing their great staff with us for an hour today. And I wish you all the best, and we'll see you back here in January. We do have our next webinar is scheduled, so there'll be more information coming out on that. I hope everybody has a fantastic holiday, healthy and safe. Have a good new year, and we'll see you in 2022. Thanks.